He quit high school at 16 to join the Merchant Marine and saw action in World War II, earning the Merchant Marine Combat Medal. After the war, he served in the National Guard before joining the Army, where he fought in Korea with the 5th Regimental Combat Team. He was James Bumgarner, and along the way he would earn a pair of Purple Hearts for combat wounds, including taking shrapnel to the face from a mortar explosion. But it was while on guard duty one night when he saved his unit thanks to his acute sense of smell. Picking up a scent of garlic, which he knew was staple in the diets of the Chinese and North Koreans, he gave warning to his men. They were on the other side of the rise, he wrote in his memoir years later. We were ready for their ambush, stopped them cold in their tracks. The world would come to know him as James Garner, one of the great leading men of film and television in the 20th century. I've had a wonderful life, and service for my country is the thing I'm most proud of, Garner said shortly before passing away in 2014. He grew up so poor that the first time he ate 3 meals in a day was in the Army Air Force. He was a gunner on a B-29 Superfortress assigned to the 61st Bombardment Squadron based out of Guam, where he would fly 25 harrowing missions throughout 1945, most of them over the Japanese mainland and surrounding islands. He was Corporal Charles Dennis Bukinski, and it was during a bombing run over the critical Hodogaya chemical plant where he was riddled with machine gun fire as the bomber approached the target. Bleeding profusely, Corporal Bukinski refused aid as he remained at his gun and fought off an onslaught of fighters until they returned safely, earning a Purple Heart. The world would come to know him as Charles Bronson, one of Hollywood's most bankable leading men, whose breakthrough role came in The Magnificent Seven. I was proud to serve my country, reflected Bronson in a rare interview about his service. Not a day goes by when I don't think about the guys who didn't make it back. As a teenager, he had a flourishing career as a radio actor, known for his impersonations. He was also valedictorian of his high school class and was fluent in 12 languages, including Chinese, Russian, and Korean. He graduated from Columbia University at age 19 and earned a master's degree from Yale at 21. His name was Sorrell Booke, and before the world knew him as the scheming and corrupt boss hog on the Dukes of Hazzard, he served as a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. His specialty was interrogating captured Korean and Chinese soldiers, reviewing transmissions between China and Korea, and debriefing returned and escaped American prisoners of war. Booke was also a topography expert, analyzing terrain that was favorable for advancing versus defending, a critical role during the war. I'm just an ordinary guy from Buffalo, is all he would say about his time in the Army. Sorrell was the most gracious and humble man I've ever met, said Duke's co-star James Best. Her helicopter was traveling to Phu Bai, 50 miles north of Da Nang, when they came under heavy enemy fire. I was never scared, recalled Margaret years later. I was with my boys. They always had my back. It was 1966, and just a few years earlier she had rocketed to superstardom in movies like Bye Bye Birdie and Viva Las Vegas. And it was a conversation with Elvis Presley that convinced Ann to travel to Vietnam to entertain the troops and lift their morale. There's nothing more sacred than defending freedom, the king told her. If you feel strongly about it, don't give it a second thought. When she wasn't in Vietnam or lighting up the big screen, she was visiting wounded vets in VA hospitals or taking the time to chat with them before and after live performances. In 2003, the USO honored Ann with the Spirit of Hope Award, named after the legendary Bob Hope. For those boys to give their lives for my freedom, I'll never stop thanking them, said a tearful Ann in her acceptance speech. He was struggling with the script, hesitant to come out of his trailer. The hulking actor, known for his tough guy persona, had finished blocking the scene and was overcome with uncontrollable emotion. He was Neville Brand, one of the most respected character actors of the 50s and 60s, and he was filming an episode of The Twilight Zone about a World War II veteran who's forced to relive the horrors of the war. Only for Neville Brand, it wasn't acting. 2 decades earlier, he lay bleeding to death in a cabin along the Weser River in Germany, having stormed it single-handedly and clearing out a German sniper nest. The Purple Heart recipient never spoke of the incident until a knock on his trailer door that day. It was Rod Serling, and after the two men chatted, Brand returned to the set and turned in a brilliant performance. When Serling passed away, Neville Brand traveled cross-country to attend the service. "If it wasn't for Rod, I wouldn't be here," he was overheard tearfully whispering to a mourning Charles Bronson. "He saved me once upon a time." It had been a long day of filming and the crew was frantically relighting the set for one final take. The movie was Breakfast at Tiffany's, and the three stars, Audrey Hepburn, George Peppard, and Buddy Ebsen, were patiently waiting to wrap for the day. One of the extras looked towards Peppard and whispered, "Semper Fi." Peppard had served in the Marine Corps in the late 40s, and Ebsen had a commission in the Coast Guard during the war. Audrey Hepburn was moved hearing her two co-stars discuss their service. As a teen, she had been a part of the Dutch underground resistance, helping downed Allied air crews to return safely to England. "We tried to do our part during the war," she said to Peppard and Ebsen. "I don't know if it made a difference, but we tried." As the actors broke up, a camera operator tapped the beautiful starlet on her shoulder. "Miss Hepburn, I flew a B-17 during the war. I was one of those pilots you helped. You absolutely made a difference," he said, choking back tears. Actor Larry Wilcox enlisted in the Marine Corps when he turned 19, following in the footsteps of his older brother. It was 1967, and it meant a tour of duty in Vietnam. Larry served as a field artilleryman with the 12th Marines, directing fire for howitzers and large artillery. His tour of duty included combat in Dong Ha, the DMZ, and the Tet Offensive. When Wilcox was honorably discharged in 1973 as a staff sergeant, his only thought was returning home to see his family. He was shocked when he was met with derision from onlookers at the airport and raced for a cab. "I barely had enough money for the cab, but I didn't care," recalled Wilcox. The cabbie had a world-weary look in his eyes, Wilcox remembered, but not a word was said during the hour drive. As he arrived at the house, Wilcox began to empty his pockets for the expensive fare. "This one's on me, Sarge. Thank you for your service," said the driver, his voice cracking. "He'll never know how much that meant to me," Wilcox recalled, fighting back tears. She joined the Office of Strategic Services because she was too tall for the Women's Army Corps in the U.S. Navy's waves. She worked for legendary Wild Bill Donovan as a top-secret researcher in Washington, D.C. before being shipped out to the Pacific for a unique assignment. Her name was Julia Child, and when she was asked to solve the problem of underwater explosives being set off by curious sharks, her solution was to cook various concoctions as a shark repellent. It worked so well that it was also used to coat life jackets for sailors. Julia was promoted to chief of the OSS registry. It was there that she also met husband Paul, and when he was transferred to France after the war, it was Paul who encouraged her to attend culinary school. 20 best-selling books and an award-winning TV show later, Julia always considered the shark repellent her first culinary contribution to the world. "During the war, we were dying to help our country," an emotional Child said shortly before passing away in 2004. He flew 25 combat missions across Europe as a radio man and gunner on a B-24 Liberator in the 453 Bombardment Group based at RAF Old Buckenham. He was decorated with an Air Medal in addition to 6 battle stars, and earned the nickname Kid Reliable by the others because of his steady nerves and composure under fire. He was born Walter John Matthau, but the world would come to know him as Walter Matthau, the versatile and iconic actor of film, stage, and TV for over 5 decades. But were it not for a brief conversation with his operations officer in the 453rd, he might have gone unnoticed to the world. After one particular debriefing, Staff Sergeant Matthau finally summoned the courage to ask him a personal question. It was about a career in acting, something Jimmy Stewart knew a little about. "I want to do what you do," he sheepishly confessed to Stewart. "Don't be the next Jimmy Stewart, just be you," the legend told Kid Reliable, "and it'll all work out." He was in Hollywood less than 2 years when he scored the lead in Kid Galahad, alongside Bette Davis and Edward G. Robinson. His name was Wayne Morris, and he became an overnight sensation, starring in a dozen movies in the late 1930s. It was while filming the movie Flight Angels with Jane Wyman that Morris learned to fly. Influenced by his friend Jimmy Stewart, Morris enlisted in the Navy before Pearl Harbor and saw extensive action in the Pacific flying a F-6F Hellcat off the carrier USS Essex. He flew 57 missions, shooting down 7 Japanese aircraft and becoming one of the earliest American aces of the war. Following the war, Wayne struggled with PTSD, and acting roles soon dried up. Wayne Morris was visiting the aircraft carrier USS Bon Homme to watch aerial maneuvers when he tragically died on the bridge from a heart attack at the age of 45. "My greatest role was serving my country," Wayne once said. "It was the role of a lifetime." He enlisted in the Navy just 4 days shy of his 18th birthday with the hopes of becoming a pilot, but because of his color blindness, was made a gunner. He was stationed on an aircraft carrier as a turret gunner for an Avenger torpedo bomber, a job that he excelled at. His name was Paul Newman, and were it not for a bizarre twist of fate, he might not have survived the Second World War. It was the Battle of Okinawa, one of the most grueling and costly of the Pacific Theater, and Newman's crew was assigned to the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill. An ear infection prevented Newman's pilot from flying, and they remained in Hawaii while their squadron joined the aircraft carrier. On May 11, 1945, the Bunker Hill was struck by 2 Japanese kamikazes, killing nearly 400 men, including everyone from Newman's squadron. Newman would say years later that he only got over the survivor's guilt after meeting Joanne Woodward, his wife of 50 years. "I wouldn't have made it without her," he said shortly before passing away in 2008. He flew a staggering 44 missions as a bombardier on a B-25 over the Pacific during World War II. He was a second lieutenant in the 100th Bombardment Squadron based in New Guinea, dubbed the Jungle Air Force because of the low-altitude bombing missions. He was Russ Johnson, and on their 44th mission, they were tasked to bomb a Japanese airfield in the Philippines from only 500 feet for a 3rd consecutive day. Japanese anti-aircraft guns pummeled the B-25. The co-pilot was killed and the crew bailed into the sea off the coast of Zamboanga City, but not before they nailed the target. Johnson broke both ankles from the hard fall and tread water for 12 hours before being rescued. He earned a Purple Heart and Bronze Star that day, to go along with a half-dozen other medals throughout the war. The world would come to know the lieutenant as Russell Johnson, the beloved professor on Gilligan's Island. He never spoke of his time in the war, recalled his co-star Dawn Wells. He was a bona fide war hero and never uttered a word. He dropped out of high school shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor to join the Marine Corps. "School is useless. I want to defend my country," he told his parents over their objections. His name was Donald James Yarmy, and as a rifleman in the 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, he would see action at the Battle of Guadalcanal. After weeks of intense fighting, Yarmy came down with blackwater fever and spent over a year in a hospital in New Zealand. Following the war, he tried his hand at a series of odd jobs before breaking into show business as a comedian and impressionist. Now known as Don Adams, he would achieve stardom as the bumbling Agent 86 in the TV show Get Smart, a parody of the popular spy movies and shows of the day. Adams made a point of casting fellow war veterans whenever he could, including Cesar Romero, Ernest Borgnine, and Ted Knight, among others. "I served with so many heroes who never made it back," Adams once said. "I think about them all the time. I was one of the lucky ones." At 17, he got his parents' permission to enlist in the Army Air Force during World War II. He wanted to follow his older brother Jimmy, who was about to ship off to Europe and would eventually see action at Anzio. His name was Peter Ornish, though the world would come to know him as Peter Graves, a staple of television and film for over 5 decades. Corporal Graves flew dozens of missions in the Pacific and was awarded the American Campaign and World War II Victory Medals. Upon returning stateside, he again followed his big brother's lead, joining James Arness in Hollywood. Before James broke through as Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, it was Peter who hit it big with his role as Price, the stoolie in the iconic World War II film Stalag 17. Filming the climactic scene, a nervous Graves leaned on friend and fellow war hero Neville Brand to calm his jitters. "There's nothing to be jumpy about, it's just acting," Brand gently reminded Graves between takes. "It's much easier than dodging bullets." He was a popular radio personality in the late 1930s, known for his comedic impersonations. His film career was just beginning to take off when he put it on hold to serve his country. He was Art Carney, and though he won an Oscar in 1974 for the film Harry and Tonto, he'll forever be remembered as Jackie Gleason's wacky sidekick on The Honeymooners. Carney was a light machine gunner with the 28th Infantry Division's 30 caliber machine gun squad, which saw intense fighting at Saint-Lô, France in July of 1944. He had just taken up a position in the early morning hours of August 15th, when a German mortar shell blew him in the air, nearly taking off his right leg. Medics were able to save the leg, though it would be an inch shorter, and he'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. For his wounds, he received a Purple Heart. "More than any character I played, I want to be remembered for my service," Carney said in an interview just before he passed away in 2003. His simple gravestone simply says, "Only love lasts." He forged his mother's signature so he could join the United States Navy at the age of 15. The year was 1942, and young Frederick Hubbard Gwynne was determined to serve his country following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The teenager would become a radio man third class on board the submarine chaser USS Manville, which played a key role in the invasions of Saipan and Tinian. Following the war, Gwynne moved to Los Angeles, and with his deep voice and unique looks, found steady work until his breakthrough role in Car 54, Where Are You? But it was his role as the lovably naive Herman Munster that cemented his legacy as one of the most recognizable characters in television history. Fred's final on-air appearance was one of his most iconic, as the irascible judge in My Cousin Vinny. Fred Gwynne passed away from pancreatic cancer shortly after filming. Fred was in so much pain, but he never missed a beat, remembered co-star Marissa Tomei. He was a lovely, lovely man. He landed on Juno Beach in the early hours of June 6, 1944, among the first wave of men to hit the sand, part of the 13th Field Regiment of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. He was Lieutenant James Montgomery Doohan, and upon landing at Juno Beach he took out 2 German snipers while leading his men to higher ground through a field of anti-tank mines. It was during a night patrol when he was ambushed and shot 6 times, including once in the chest, which miraculously ricocheted off a silver cigarette case given to him by his brother just weeks earlier. His right finger was amputated on the spot, and he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. The world would come to know him as Scottie, the resourceful engineer on the USS Enterprise in the original Star Trek series and movies. James Doohan passed away in 2005 at the age of 85. In 2008, some of his ashes were smuggled aboard and hidden on the International Space Station's Columbus module. She was moved by an advertisement that she read in a magazine. "Be a Marine, free a man to fight," was all it said. But it convinced her to enlist in the United States Marine Corps Women's Reserve. It was February 18, 1943, and only a week earlier the Marines had begun recruiting women in order to free up men to go overseas. Her name was Bernice Frankel, and she would spend the duration of the war at the Marine Corps Air Station in Cherry Point, North Carolina, where she worked as a truck driver, dispatcher, and mechanic. By the time she was discharged in September 1945, she had reached the rank of staff sergeant and indicated a desire to attend drama school. The world would come to know her as Bea Arthur, iconic star of stage and TV for 5 decades, who shared the small screen with fellow Golden Girl Betty White, who amazingly was also a World War II veteran. "I am proud to have served my country," said Arthur, shortly before she passed away in 2009.